All right, good morning, everyone. So good to see you all today as we begin a talk on the third of the Narnia books, and again, in publication order. I apologize if you go back to sort of the original publication, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Horse and His Boy. We'll take a break for a building committee meeting, and then we have The Silver Chair, The Magician's Nephew, and finally, The Last Battle. So that's the order, and I'll try to remember to say it at the beginning and end of each session, so you have a week to do it. But so today is Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Next week will be The Horse and His Boy. And the reason that all the current editions, if you pick up a copy like the one with the big lion, fiery lion on the front, the reason the order is different is because they've arranged them chronologically with respect to this Narnia story. So it starts at like the creation of Narnia and it goes to the last, the end of Narnia. So that's why they did it that way. But, we're going to focus on the publication order. Okay. Any questions about what we're doing or what we're up to before we begin? I'm going to wait for Cookie to get in because it looks like she's trying to get in here. All right. And again, our speaker, Terry Lindvall.
Welcome to week 4 of Narnia for Grown-Ups. And today we go into the sea. Not into the sea, but metaphorically we'll be going there. And Lewis said about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, this was the easiest book he had to write. He just sat down and he put a bunch of little stories together, like beads on a string. And it starts really as a quest. And it's also a very kind of precarious and dangerous journey by water to find the 7 lords. If you remember last time, King Miraz had taken over the kingdom. He had killed Caspian's father, and the 7 lords that were loyal to King Caspian were killed, or sent off to find new territory. And so Caspian now is grown up, and he's trying to find all of these men. But it's also very similar to the Odyssey. And I'm sure most of you remember, not when it was written, but you remember reading the Odyssey in college. And you get the same kind of monsters along the way. You get the same kind of dangers that come. But even more is this Celtic legend of the Irish saint, Saint Brendan. Saint Brendan wrote The Journey to the Isle of the Blessed. Allegedly, he actually discovered America way before Christopher Columbus, according to legend. He was called the Navigator, and he writes about sailing to all of these places. There was a pastoral island of sheep, kind of Arcadia, just a beautiful place he stopped at. He was chased by a sea creature. We're going to find some of these kind of episodes repeated in this book. There was a magnificent bird that would drop a bough of grapes the size of apples, so juicy and succulent. And then he discovered what I thought was very fascinating, an island with this aroma. And the aroma was just overwhelming. It was spring, it was earth, and it was something that would just make you dizzy and just want to stay there. The Voyage of St. Brendan was an old Irish tale called an Imram. And one description is on one island there were great demons who threw down lumps of fiery slag with rivers of gold fire in the middle of great crystal pillars or towers. Many think these are volcanoes and icebergs. And so you can see this kind of fiery slag, fire coming up as the volcano, and then the crystal pillars as icebergs around Greenland. And this is the map of where he took it, coming down out of Ireland and moving up to all of these different places. And we'll get to this in just a second. And that's why I've given you maps too, so you can follow the adventures we're going to have with Prince Caspian. Now they land on an island they called Jasconius. And Jasconius, they're going to have an Easter service. They're conducting their service in the communion. They discovered it is a whale. They're on this giant whale and it starts to move. And so it's this wonderful legend of how the whale held them until they finished their Eucharist service. He also finds a hermit clinging to a very dark, cold rock in the middle of the ocean. He turns out to be Judas. Judas is given 1 day a year on Easter to go and have a holiday or a holy day. This is called the refrigerium. Refrigerium basically means the occasional break from the torments of hell. And so they find this man out there in the sea. We're going to see him pop up in this book today. Here's St. Brendan's gift for Episcopalians who want a day off. I love St. Brendan's. It's a wonderful thing. I've never lectured with drinking St. Brendan's, but I should sometime just to see how interesting it would become. Besides being a quest, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is also what is known as a Bildungsroman, basically a coming-of-age novel in German. And the plot is like any college kid. The youth leaves home. You have conflicts, both internal, because you're struggling to discover who you are, and external, the roommates you get at college. But the youth learns and matures and finally comes home with debt. I'm kidding, that's not in the story. But they come home with new knowledge. If you remember, there are many kind of coming-of-age stories. Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. They're the coming of age, they're growing up. Emma with Jane Austen, who starts off and she tries to meddle in everybody else's life, or Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll and then taken by Walt Disney. Pinocchio, Harry Potter. All of these are coming-of-age stories that Lewis is going to deal with here. But we have two coming-of-age stories. The first one is going to be Eustace, a boy we'll meet in a second, and the second is Caspian. The first sentence in the book is the best sentence anywhere. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Lewis is throwing himself under the bus here because his name is Clive's Staple Lewis, and he almost deserved it. He hated his name, and so he said, "Call me Jaxie." So he became Jack Lewis. But this great introduction of Eustace Clarence Scrubb, an awful name, a name that's going to invite bullies and everyone else and shows you what a little jerk he is. Hopefully he's not like our children or us. In fact, he mocks the two children, Edmund and Lucy, who are kind of stuck at his home. And he says, there was once two orphans who wasted their time believing in Narnian nursery rhyme. And then he is going into Narnia with the two children because what happens is they're watching a painting in his room. And suddenly the painting comes to life. This is very much like a George MacDonald novel. It's also, we're going to notice, like Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. As idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. They are watching it, and suddenly and slowly the ship begins to move. Water, water everywhere, and no any drop to drink. And you're getting the sense of we're going into a different world and we're being called into this world. And they don't know what to do as the water gushes out of the painting into the room and they find themselves capsized out into the ocean. Now, we're going to go through these islands, and there are about 7 isles here, and they're going to start down here, go to the Lone Islands, and then move up and encounter a sea serpent, a magician's island, Goldwater Island. He's not the one who ran for president. That was a long time ago. And then the Dark Island, and end up here at the island of Ramadou. So, under what planet does Michael Ward place the Voyage of the Dawn Treader? Not Neptune. We would think that because it's at sea that we're going to deal with Neptune and the old man of the sea. This is when I grew my beard, and my wife thought I looked so much like Neptune out here on the beach. I don't have the muscles, though, so I wore a really loose shirt. However, the planet is not Neptune, according to Michael Ward, it's the sun. Under the influence of the sun, we get these characteristics. We will find Apollo, the god of the sun. We will find gold, the east, wisdom, which is the gift of Apollo, the god of light. And again, look at the title, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So the sun is coming up. So Lewis is planting all of these hints and clues about which planet belongs here. We will find dragons and greed and gold. Both Eustace and Caspian will hold greedy thoughts. In the hymn to Apollo, the great poem, the sun god Apollo, with his golden locks, has to kill a python, the dragon. And so we find the dragon, which is associated with Apollo, going to be a major part of the story as well. In fact, you may remember from the Bible, walking through the marketplace, Paul and Silas encounter a girl possessed with the spirit of Python, the Pneuma Pathona, who made money for her greedy masters. So the python was the serpent or dragon that would guard the Delphic oracle for Apollo at Mount Parnassus. Okay. Again, Aslan becomes known as Solar Logos, solar meaning the sun, the word of the sun. And this appears 7 times throughout the book. Now remember, last week we had Mars, and we had the word marshal in Prince Caspian. Here everything is about the sun. The sun comes and it hurts and humbles people. It's so bright. In their journey to the rising sun of the east, Reepicheep, the little mouse, will sink his nose into the sunrise, and he finds water to be drinkable light. And so what I'm kind of rushing you with, I'm kind of flooding you with all of these kind of symbols of the sun to show you how Michael Ward has seen this here. So they undergo about 9 or 10 adventures. And the Dawn Treader is also a symbol for the church. As you know, the church is related to kind of the boat. Every church sanctuary is known as the nave, coming from kind of the navy, from this great kind of opening that's there. The first arrival is at the Lone Islands. It's called Felometh. And they find a Narnian governor, a Narnian in name anyway, called Governor Gumpus. Lewis again borrows from Edith Nesbit, the story of the amulet. They arrive at the Lone Islands where pirates capture them and make them slaves. In Nesbit's story, the children go through the magic amulet and they find themselves on a boat outside ancient Tyre. When they land, they're captured and made slaves. And so Lewis kind of uses a lot of her material to carry on. So what do they learn on the Lone Islands? What do they discover when they come to the Lone Islands? The first thing they discover is that there's slavery. And for a Narnian, slavery is wrong. Lewis is pointing back to one of the first lords who is there that they find, and this is Lord Byrne. And Lord Byrne is living out away from the Governor Gumpus. And as he realizes the real king has landed, he joins forces with King Caspian, and they go to end the slavery. They liberate this Narnian outpost. And Caspian asks a question about the governor. He said, what's he like? Does he acknowledge the king of Narnia for his lord? Well, says Byrne, he gives a perfunctory acknowledgement of Narnia, but he does not live like it. But he would not like it if a real king of Narnia happened to show up. How is the government of the island like certain progressive Episcopal clergy? They say they believe God. They believe in, some don't even believe in the resurrection. And so are they really a believer in the king that is coming back? And so Lewis is really pointing to the Anglican clergy of England, saying they have lost their faith as well, like Gumpus. Now, Goon Gumpus is an actual place in Cornwall. And it's a small little settlement you can see up there with its tower. It has a lot of tin mining, and it has the site of Lewis's favorite fairy tale of Jack the Giant Killer. But Lewis is going to satirize modern progress, especially when he meets the governor. The governor argues that slave trade is an essential part of the economic development of the islands. When Caspian disagrees, Gumpus replies that he has statistics and graphs to demonstrate his point. How do government officials prove what they're doing is right? Statistics and graphs and long reports. And so Caspian is going to challenge that. But Gumpus says that, no, we can't stop it. It's like putting the clock back. Have you no idea, Caspian, of what progress is and how we need progress? Here's where Lewis is going to show that tradition is more important than progress. There's something different. Caspian says, I have seen progress and development in an egg. We call it going bad. The trade must be stopped. In Mere Christianity, Lewis writes, it may be hard for an egg to turn into a bird, but it's going to be a jolly sight harder for it to learn to fly while remaining an egg. You can imagine an egg trying to fly with wings. It's going to drop and crack. Lewis says, we are like birds at present, and you cannot go on indefinitely being just an ordinary, decent egg. We've got to hatch or we go bad. So he challenges kind of modern growth. And he says there's a difference between what we like in childhood and what we like in adults. Progress says, what I liked in childhood, I've got to get rid of. If you like lemon juice as a child, then it means you can't like wine as a grown-up. But if you want to just like wine, you forget you like lemon squash. He says, I like them both. I like the things I enjoyed as a child, but I also like the things that I enjoy as an adult. That is called growth, not progress. Okay? So Lewis explains this difference between growth and progress. He says, I now enjoy Tolstoy and Jane Austen as well as fairy tales, and I call that growing up. If I had to lose the fairy tales in order to acquire the novelist, I would not say I had grown, but only that I had changed. So progress without growth is something that we lose, that tradition. He says, a tree grows because it adds rings. A train doesn't grow by leaving one station behind and puffing on to the next. So how are our lives? Are our lives like trains where we leave behind certain memories and certain traditions, or are our lives like trees where we add to that tradition and we keep that tradition? And this is what we can pass on to our children and grandchildren. So the fellowship goes on, and it has the obligatory storm at sea and the sea serpent. They're always going to be in kind of sea novels. What I find interesting is that Charles and John Wesley, they came across to the United States to kind of settle down in Georgia. And on the way, they had a frightful storm at sea. And they were scared. Those Methodists get scared easily. Any Methodists in here? Okay, you Methodists, you get scared so easily. What they found were Moravians. And the Moravians were just at peace with God. And so Charles and John Wesley realized they needed to be strangely warmed. They needed to be kind of comforted by all of that. Of course, if you're on a Carnival cruise, a storm is to be preferred over a sewage disaster. So don't sign up for Carnival cruises. I'm kidding, that's there, okay. They do meet the sea serpent in a thrilling adventure, and it's one of those creatures from the sea, like Leviathan, to Moby Dick, to Jaws. And they have to join together because this large serpent is squeezing them and looping around the boat. And yet the serpent is so stupid that they're able to get out of it. Then they come to Dragon Island. On Dragon Island, this is where they find the death of one of the first lords, Lord Octavian. This offers one of the most imaginative and powerful of images Lewis can convey in the book. This is where the story of Eustace, who is a miserable little twit, changes. What we find is that the story of a small person in the midst of a larger story matters. Everybody's story matters. This is so important for a community that when we sit down with one another, that we hear each other's story. Even the most insignificant and the most obnoxious of characters, like Ben Fraser, his story matters. Okay, we move on. So remember MacDonald's story of Curdy discerning what each animal becomes. And Eustace, because he gets greedy thoughts over a dragon's gold, turns into a dragon. Here he becomes miserable. And miserable is a great word to confess when you're miserable. Miserable basically means I need mercy. And so when people declare they are miserable sinners, they're basically saying, I'm a sinner who needs mercy and grace. So it's a very positive word. Eustace is told to undress himself, and he can't do it. Every time he rips his flesh, he tears off a layer of flesh, and he still has another layer under that. I just undressed my mic. It fell down. We good again? Okay. So he takes his flesh off, but every time he takes a layer of the flesh off, there's a new layer. And it's like dealing with sin. You try by yourself to take that sin off, but that sin is still there. You find resentment or anger or anything else, and you keep trying, and he can't get the sin off of his selfishness. So it takes Aslan coming up to him, and with his claws, he says, this is going to hurt. But he uses his claws, and he cuts the sin away from Eustace. And Eustace becomes a boy again out of this dragon suit. But this is what Lewis calls the pain, problem of pain. To be transformed, to be changed, we go through pain. And pain is a necessary part of our journey. So Eustace undressing, his conversion, Lewis says, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but he shouts to us in our pain. Pain and suffering are God's megaphones to wake up a deaf world. And so when we go through trials, it's to remember that God's grace is still with us. And it may be a really difficult time, but it's something that God is saying, I'm talking to you now. Reepicheep comes along, the little mouse, and he's kind of just a bright little mouse. And he says basically extraordinary things happen to extraordinary people. And he becomes like the medieval philosopher Boethius. Boethius is a kind of an incredible man. He is the one who comes up while he's in prison with the idea of the fortune turning the wheel. All of us see our lives go in this kind of wheel, into this circle. And so he finds comfort in philosophy, which reminds him of the medieval wheel of fortune. When you're proud and everything is well, what direction can you go? Down. When you're low and humble and miserable, what direction can your life go? Up. And so the wheel of fortune is there, what Boethius says. And you remember the song, the wheels on the bus go up and down, up and down, up and down. Let's all sing. No, we're not going to. It's there. Okay. Of course, we have our own wheel of fortune, which people go bankrupt with, but it's not like Boethius. No comfort there. Lewis writes, it would be nice and fairly nearly true to say from the time forth when Eustace was changed from a dragon into a boy, he was different. But he had relapses. There were still many days when he could be very tiresome. But most of those I shall not notice. The cure had begun. And that is with us, that as we move towards glory, the cure of our life has begun, even though if we're not always aware. Next, they go to Goldwater Island. And Goldwater Island is also called Deathwater Island. And it recalls a certain myth, a legend of the Greeks. Does anyone remember what it is? Midas, good. Basically, it's the greed for gold. And Prince Caspian wants the gold as well. And he forgets his responsibility as a king as he goes for it. And so we have this King Midas touch at Goldwater Island, where anything can turn to gold if you touch it. Heavy as lead, the gold turns everyone into competing, bullying, swaggering idiots. Anyone's sword would become a gold sword. Anyone's finger could become gold finger. He's the man. I'm not going to sing it either. The man with the Midas touch, a spider's touch. Such a cold finger beckons you to enter his web of sin, but don't go in. Thank you, Shirley Bassey. Last time I presented this at Galilee, I had someone, Shelley, who could sing it, and she just belted it out like Shirley Bassey. It was really great. I should have had Pam do it here. Just sing like Shirley Bassey. Okay. Then they moved to a really fun kind of comic island called the Island of the Voices, or the Invisible Dufflepods. They come and there are all these invisible creatures that are just bouncing around. And basically, St. Augustine in his City of God talks about these kinds of creatures, as does Pliny in his Natural History. And they have just one foot, with they can sail or they can jump. And they jump around and they say very stupid things. They are the Three Stooges of Narnia. When you look at, they're performers right out of the British music halls. They're called a scapiopod, and their single foot can be a sunshade or a model for Lewis's dufflepods, or also called monopods or duffers. They always say the obvious. What I always say is, when a chap's hungry, he likes some food. Or, Getting dark now, always does at night. Okay, now everybody repeat this part. Everybody read it.
Right you are, Chief. That's right. That's right. You couldn't have said it better. You've had some education. Anyone can see that.
Thank you. I've had some education. You see that? Okay, good there. Lucy must go, however, to get this curse off of them and find a magician's book. And she needs to make a spell that makes invisible things visible again. She finds a catalog of magical spells. In the margins and around the big colored capital letters at the beginning of each spell, there are pictures as in a medieval illuminated manuscript. If you've ever seen the Book of Kells over in Dublin, this is kind of what we're seeing, and Lewis is picturing this. Below is an H, you can see over there, an O, and then an S, almost in kind of a Monty Python style here. She discovers incantations for curing warts, for curing a toothache, and Lewis hated toothaches. Toothaches was the worst they could get them, and they didn't have modern dentistry in the 40s and 50s in Britain for him. For a swarm of bees that seemed to get real, and spells for remembering and spells for forgetting. Wouldn't we like spells like that? Some spells we could remember and other things we want to forget. One spell shows how to give a man an ass's head. And you know where this comes from, Midsummer Night's Dream and Bottom. She reads on and she comes across a spell that lets you hear what your friends think of you. Lucy reads the spell and sees a moving picture, like a movie, appear on the page of the book. It shows a conversation in which her friend Marjorie speaks cruelly of Lucy. So we don't really want to know what others think of us, because they're gossiping about us much like we gossip about them. All of us do the same thing, says the book of Ecclesiastes. So she gets in there, and there's a spell for making it snow. She makes it snow in the room. And she comes across a spell to make a person very beautiful. And the picture in the book shows Lucy transformed into a sensationally beautiful version of herself. And just as she is preparing to read the spell, the image of Aslan appears in the middle of the page and prevents her from doing so, because Aslan realized her vanity is getting her. And Aslan says, "What have you done, child?" And she goes, I'm so sorry. He says, "You doubt your value. Don't run for who you are. This is the way I made you." And so Lucy finally then finds the spell to make invisible things visible. And when she reads it, she hears footsteps and turns around, and there's Aslan. And she says, "Nice of you to come." And Aslan says, "I've been here the whole time. I've just been invisible, and now you can see me." Then we move to Dark Island, and things go from comic to eerie and uncanny. This is the island where dreams come true. And so the crew of the Dawn Treader come to realize that these dreams were in fact the kind that made you afraid of going back to sleep. Lewis had childhood terrors himself, and he did not want other children to go through this. But what Lewis does in this section, he reworks Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And you remember that piece of literature in which a wedding guest who is going to a wedding is met by a strange old mariner who is kind of lean and scary. And he says, he holds him by the collar and he tells him this whole story of his journey almost to hell. So Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where the poet leaves his lighthouse, his hill, and his kirk, the church. He leaves his reason, nature, and faith, but he returns home as well. Now, there are programs that look back to Coleridge, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, to Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden really kind of picked up this whole thing. As idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Day after day, we stuck, nor breath nor motion. And so we find them stuck in this dark island where this cloud has taken over them. Then comes this image of the albatross, and you remember in the poem what the mariner does. He gets his crossbow and he shoots the albatross. And the albatross is a Christ figure. And so he has brought a curse upon the ship The ship sinks and everyone in it except for the mariner. They find when they're going through, knowing this story, that one of the lords is in this dark island. And we remember Judas on the island. And they hear a shrill, loud voice cry, "Mercy, mercy! If you only hear one more dream, have mercy. Take me on board. Take me even if you strike me dead. But in the name of all mercies, don't fade away and leave me in this horrible land." "Where are you?" shouted Caspian. "Come aboard and welcome." Edmund thought he had never seen a wilder-looking man. Though he did not otherwise look very old, his hair was an untidy mop of white. His face was thin and drawn. And as for clothing, only a few wet rags hung around him. But what one mainly noticed were his eyes, which were so widely open that he seemed to have no eyelids, and he stared as if in agony or pure fear. The moment his feet reached the deck, he said, "Fly! Fly! Fly with your ship! Fly! Row, row, row for your lives away from this cursed shore!" "Compose yourself," said Reepicheep, "and tell us what the danger is. We are not used to flying." "Nevertheless, you will fly from here. This is the island where dreams come true." "Wow, that's the island I've been looking for a long time," said one of the sailors. "I'd reckon I'd find I was married to Nancy if we landed here. And I'd find Tom, my friend, alive again," said another. "No," said the man. "Fools," stamping his foot with rage. "That is the sort of talk that brought me here, and I'd rather been drowned or never born. Do you hear what I say? This is where dreams, do you understand, come to life, come real. Not daydreams, dreams." There was about half a minute of silence, and then with a great clatter of armor, the whole crew was tumbling down the main hatch as quick as they could and flinging themselves on the oars to row as they'd never rowed before. "We'll never get out, we'll never get out." They turn quickly and row, but suddenly everyone starts hearing something different in the darkness, like a huge pair of scissors opening and shutting. Something crawling up the side of the ship. Gongs begin. They fear they would never get out. And Lucy prays to Aslan, "If you ever love us at all, send us help now." And in the darkness, suddenly, a tiny speck of light appears, and suddenly an albatross circles the mast. Exhausted and shaking, they emerge from the darkness of their dreams and their nightmares, because the Christ has rescued them. The mariner says, "He prayeth best who loveth best, all things both great and small. For the dear God who loveth us, he made and loveth all." And the ancient mariner leaves the naive wedding guest as a sadder but wiser man. One of our friends is Malcolm Guite, who wrote a book on Coleridge. It's one of, if you're looking for a good book to read in this coming autumn, he wrote a book on kind of called The Mariner. Whoops. And The Mariner is basically about the life of Coleridge. And it tells how Coleridge left his church, left his nature, and left his home, his reason. And he went south and he got addicted to opium. He had nightmares and everything was destroyed, but he finally made it home and became a strong Orthodox Christian. He came back and he found the church. He found his reason. He found his faith. He found nature again. And so it's just a great book of how Coleridge's poem that he wrote before he lived it became a prophecy. Okay. Then we finally get to Ramandu's Island. And Ramandu's Island is a beautiful island. And they come upon the last three sleepers at Aslan's table. In 1 Corinthians, St. Paul describes certain Corinthians as partaking in the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner. And as a result, they grow weak, sick, and many fall asleep taking the Lord's Supper. But Caspian also meets Ramandu's daughter. Her name is Lindvall, and Lindvall is beautiful. Remember we talked about the blue flower? Here she is made kind of a blue lady. It just kind of glows with this kind of moonshine. She's a star. It's a little distracting for you. I can change form. And all the boys say, "No, don't change form. You're too good looking now. We like you the way you look now." So Caspian, in kind of a very way of flirting with her, tells Lindvall, who will later become his wife, the fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty about the sleepers. In the world from which my friends come, they have a story about a prince or a king coming to a castle where all the people lay in an enchanted sleep. In the story, the prince cannot dissolve the enchantment until he has kissed the princess. So he's trying to kiss the girl, okay? He's trying to kiss Lindvall. But here, says Lindvall, she's too smart, it is different. Here he cannot kiss the princess until he has dissolved the enchantment. So he turns the Sleeping Beauty story around and he says, you've got to do the work first and then you may kiss me. She reverses the whole idea. And so Caspian says, then in the name of Aslan, show me how to set about and get this adventure done, because I want to kiss you very, very badly. And then we flow and sail to the utter east. And this is where Reepicheep has been wanting to go all along. Now here are some different versions of Reepicheep in the book, the illustration, on the kind of BBC TV show, the movie done by Andrew Adamson, and then kind of here is just kind of a puppet image of him. But he has had a prophecy that he is going to go to the utter east. He's going to go to the end of the world where he is called to go. And he wrote, this was the prophecy given to him when he was in his cradle. A wood woman, a dryad, said this verse over him. Where sky and water meet, where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, to find all you seek, there is the utter east. He said, I do not know what it means, but it is the spell of it has been on me all my life. Last week we talked about Sehnsucht, that German word for longing, for something we know we were made for, and we are always longing for it, and this is what Reepicheep has been following. Sehnsucht, the longing for one's true home, or the desire for what we can't even express. And so he gets in his little coracle, he gets in his boat, and he heads off to the utter east all by himself, where sky and water meet, where the waves grow ever sweet, and he goes to the utter east. St. Augustine put it this way, God has made our hearts for himself, and our hearts will not rest until they rest in God. And that's where Reepicheep has gone, that he goes to meet his Maker in the far east. White lilies symbolize purity, commitment, and rebirth, and they're often associated with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so here, what he floats through is a sea of lilies, a symbol of rebirth and resurrection. Or as one great child, a little child who's the son of our rector, Andy Buchanan, when he was a little boy, Luke, when that story was read to him, Reepicheep reached the dawn, he rubbed his eyes, and Luke said, I want to marry the sunrise. The sunrise sounds so beautiful and something I want. At the end, the Aslan, who is now the Lamb of God, the lion has become the lamb, he says, come and have breakfast. In John 21, following the resurrection, Jesus is pictured preparing a breakfast of fish and bread for the disciples on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. In Revelation, one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing in the center of the throne. And so the lion becomes the slain lamb and invites us to breakfast. Lucy says, oh Aslan, will you tell us how to get into your country from our world? Aslan says, I shall be telling you all the time, but I will not tell you how long or short the way will be, only that it lies across a river. But do not fear that, for I am the great bridge builder. Lucy says, but we're not coming back to Narnia, and I will miss you. And Aslan says, in your world I have another name. You must learn to know me by it. That was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little while, you may know me better there. This was Lewis's strategy for children, to introduce them to a God that dies and comes back to life, to a God that loves them. They can see in Aslan someone that they will see later on in life in Jesus Christ. And so when you introduce a child to these stories, you are doing kind of early evangelism. You are presenting the story to them. And so Aslan says, that was the very reason you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little while, you may know me there better. So, where are you headed? What islands do you have coming up? This is your question. But don't worry, Aslan will be there. Thank you. Next week, we go to, is it The Horse and His Boy? And so it's going to be something.
So he said it too, I said it, The Horse and His Boy next week. But this week, any questions about either the content of the talk or something from the book? Favorite parts of the story that you heard? That you read? Yeah, they're they're great entries. The movies are great entries, but the books are they have so much more depth to. Hopefully, you can see have so much more depth to them, and they're just rich theology. One of my, I think we have a couple minutes, so one of my, and I realize this is very loud today. One of my favorite parts is he mentioned it briefly, the undragoning of Eustace. Which is, the first time I read it, it was one of the first times I realized how a good writer can really draw out a deep theological truth, like sin and how we deal with sin in our lives in a completely different medium, in a completely different way. And for those who didn't read, I'll just read like a little section of that part so you can get a sense. He did a good job describing it, but there's all sorts of, there's baptism imagery, there's all sorts of, I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read you a little section. He says, Eustace is describing trying to scratch away his skin. He says, so I scratched away for the third time and got off a third skin, but like the two others, I stepped out of it. As soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew it had been no good. He still looked like a dragon. Then the lion said, but I don't know if he spoke. You will have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, so I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you've ever picked a scab off a sore, it hurts like a bilio, but it is so much fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. So he's telling this is after the fact, and Eustace is telling this to Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done myself the other 3 times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, or smaller than I had ever been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now. I'd no skin on. And threw me into the water. So there was this pool of water. He threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious. And as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. So he had put when he was a boy, he had put a jewel on his arm, a bracelet on his arm, and then when he became a lion, it started cutting into the skin because he grew, right? So I saw why. I had turned into a boy. You'd think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arms. I know they've no muscle and are pretty moldy compared with Caspian's, but I was so glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you? With his paws? Well, I don't exactly remember that bit, but he did somehow or other in new clothes, the same I've got on now, as a matter of fact. And then suddenly I was back here, which is what makes me think it was a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there are the clothes, for one thing, and you've been, well, undragoned, for another. What do you think it was, then? Asked Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan. But what a wonderful, in 2 pages, he's able to describe so much of what goes into our inner life of transformation, how we're incapable of doing this on our own and we need divine assistance, how it hurts and yet it feels good at the same time. We know it's to our good. We question ourselves, did it really even happen? Did I actually have an experience of God? Well, you have the new clothes and you're not a dragon anymore. So all of these wonderful images, and it's just the whole thing is shot through. Any other thoughts or reflections to share? All right, next week, The Horse and His Boy.